Hey everyone, welcome to the Being Patient podcast. I'm Deborah Kahn, founder of Being Patient. When my mom was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, I decided to use my skills as a journalist in a different way. Frustrated by the lack of information on science and the inability to get different expert opinions, I decided to quit my job at the Wall Street Journal to create a better platform for people impacted by dementia. We are a community where news and information is created by our team of journalists. We ask tough questions and we simplify the science so that anyone can understand. We don't only cover disease, but delve into the latest research on what it takes to keep our brains healthy. We invite the experts and ask your questions. Here's today's podcast. I hope you enjoy it. Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to Being Patient Perspectives. I'm Deborah Kahn, founder of Being Patient. A lot of you write to us and tell us that you've recently found out that you have a genetic link to Alzheimer's disease. The most common link is through a genetic variant called ApoE4. Some people have found out they have one copy, which elevates their risk slightly, and others have two, one from each parent, which increases risk further. Now, everyone who has this marker doesn't necessarily get Alzheimer's. That's really, important to know, but it does establish a clear familial link. So we thought, who better to talk to than someone who has found out their genetic status and is doing something about it. So please join me in welcoming Wendy Nelson. Wendy, hi, and thanks so much for joining us.
Hi, thank you very much, Deborah. Nice to be here.
So tell us a little bit first about before you found out what your genetic status is, how prevalent is or was Alzheimer's in your family?
Sure, yes. So when I was growing up, my grandfather, my mother's father had Alzheimer's, as did my mother's aunt. So on her maternal side, her mother, my grandmother's sister. So my mom was always very afraid of getting Alzheimer's. That was very obvious through her years. And sure enough, she did get it pretty young. She got it. She was diagnosed mid-60s. We had seen signs of it before that, early 60s. And then she passed away of Alzheimer's after a 13-year battle in 2022. So I knew it was very prevalent on my mother's side of the family. I did not know it was on my father's side of the family. And after my mom passed away, I did decide to get genetically tested, and unfortunately found out I also got a variant from my father's side. So I do carry two ApoE4 variants.
Okay, and so at that time, before you got tested, you had your grandfather. Was that on your mom's side or your dad's side?
It's my mom's father and her mother's sister. So she had it on from her both maternal and paternal side.
Okay, and then did you know anyone in your dad's family who had Alzheimer's?
Did not, but looking back, my grandfather, my dad's dad, suffered from what they thought was depression. He's shut down, stopped speaking, stopped communicating. We were told he was depressed, and they were doing shock therapy or something to his brain. But looking back now, I'm almost positive it was Alzheimer's, and it just wasn't voiced back then or diagnosed.
So we get a lot of comments, as I said before, on Being Patient about people kind of in shock. A lot of people didn't really intend to find out their genetic status, but did through a relative or maybe through the results of a test that said that they had an elevated risk. You deliberately sought out to understand your genetic status, but tell us a little bit about, because I think a lot of people are faced with it, like what went into that decision? There's some people out there who say, yeah, I want to know for my kids, and there's other people who say, no way, I don't want to know that. So tell us a little bit about how you decided to make that decision.
Sure, yes. Well, I'm in the biotech industry. I have a PhD in science. I've been in the biotech industry over almost 30 years now, so my entire career. And, there are things you can do. There are clinical trials and stuff. So knowing, 4, 5, 6 years ago, I used to not want to know because there was nothing you could do if you're found to carry it or prone to get it. You know, they say you can eat healthy, you can exercise. I do those, but my mom did them too. So, but it really is, as I've watched more and more of the clinical trial space in this indication, and knowing that you know, they're trying to get people onto clinical trials earlier, and being a carrier qualifies you for some clinical trials now. So I that's part of the reason I decided to find out, but it was also partially because I was hoping I was only going to carry one, and I was hoping it would help alleviate some of the stress and fear I carried with me. And in fact, it unfortunately backfired, and I found out I did in fact carry two, and that was before my dad went down this road. So it did not. I did 23andMe, as a lot of people are doing these days, and unfortunately, it sort of confirmed my worst fears instead of alleviating them.
So how were you, you know, for people who haven't gotten their genetic tests, how did you get that information? Did you like log into 23andMe and pop up and it says, uh-oh, you have two variants? Like, how does the information present itself?
Oh, they send you a nice report with all kinds of interesting information about, you know, a million other things. And then it has the ApoE4 variant, and it says you carry two. You are at a significantly increased risk for Alzheimer's. And I thought, crap.
Right.
So yes, it's very clear as day, a nice whole big page on it.
And how, at that time, I mean, you seem to be, being in biotech, you're well educated on, you know, science topics, on genetics, probably more so than the average person. But, you know, how did you, I mean, you know, I guess, you know, your shock was you had two copies, not just one, and you didn't expect that. So how did you deal with that information? How did you process it? I think that's the point that people are really worried about. Like, what am I going to be like once I know this, right?
Yeah, it is very disappointing and discouraging and depressing at first. And I think it took me a little time to swallow that pill. But then I'm a scientist. I mean, I'm not going to just sit back and accept my likely fate. I wanted to figure out what I can do about it. So I did more research on my own as to what you can do. I have gone on a low-level rosuvastatin, a statin to decrease cholesterol. There are more and more ties between cholesterol buildup and Alzheimer's. So it's known to be more helpful for younger folks. So just things like that.
Okay, wait, I want to delve a little bit into that, because I think a lot of people wouldn't know that, number one. And number two, like, how did you get prescribed that? Like,
yeah,
you know, like most doctors would be like, if you don't have high cholesterol, they'd be like, no, you don't need this drug. You don't need a statin, right? So how does one do that?
Yeah, so I had to go advocate for myself with my primary care. And thankfully, I have a primary care that will think out of the box. And I showed him some scientific papers and said, hey, look, there are some ties. And he said, he looked into it and he said, you're absolutely right. There's no harm in it. So I'm going to go ahead and put you on it. Since I have found out about my carrier situation, my younger sister has also did 23andMe, found out she also carries two ApoE4 variants, and she has tried to copy me and went to her primary care, who said, no, it's not the standard of care right now, so I'm not going to do that. So she's actually thinking of switching to my doctor, who will think a little bit more out of the box. But I've talked about it with several people in my biotech world that are researching different researching the science all the time, and they kind of backed me up and said, you're right, it can't hurt you, you should go on it. So I do things that are maybe a little out of the ordinary, maybe they're not standard of care. Your doctor's not going to tell you to do that, but it can help. It can possibly help. So I'm trying everything I can.
Yeah. And we should actually point out, everyone should talk to their doctors. Obviously, we're going to this doesn't mean everyone should get a statin.
Not everyone is a candidate, but
do you have high cholesterol? Did you see in your A1Cs were a little elevated or no?
So they're not, considering all the exercise do. I mean, I do half Ironman, I've done marathons, I'm climbing Mount Kilimanjaro for cancer research in February. I'm an extremely active person, and so is my mom, and it's genetic. genetically we have slightly, she had very high, I've got, it's borderline. So they wouldn't normally put me on a statin, but again, it can't hurt because lower would be better. So I'm sort of borderline. And again, that's very genetic, even though I eat well and exercise all the time.
Okay, and there's a question coming in from someone in our audience asking, what types of dementia did your family members have? Was it Alzheimer's, Lewy body, FTD? And is there any test out there to tell us how much amyloid plaque buildup we have in our brains at this time?
So no, my mother had Alzheimer's. I don't know about her dad or her aunt. I believe they probably were just your classic Alzheimer's as well. But I don't think as much testing was done back in that generation. So they did not do any further testing.
And also we're a lot better now at diagnosing, right? And so, I mean, even though there's still a lot of issues out there over diagnosis, definitely, but we're getting better at detecting earlier. Whereas before it was like, oh, you're just losing your memory, you're old, and it wasn't classified as a brain disease.
Right. I mean, there used to be a stigma attached to it, right? Oh, she's losing her mind. We'll just put her in a closet and not, keep her out of the public's eye. There's no stigma anymore. It's a disease, and there's nothing we can do about it. So except to help ourselves.
You mentioned clinical trials. Are you seeking, or have you joined any clinical trials for people who obviously don't have Alzheimer's, but they have a genetic variant?
I've got my eye on some companies. There's a very exciting company called Alcyon out there. It's here in the Boston area. They have excellent phase 2 data in Alzheimer's patients for what is actually an oral pill that would help upstream. It helps prevent the oligomerization process from happening in the first place, and therefore hopefully prevent those tau tangles and amyloid plaque buildup to occur in the first place. They have just enrolled their phase 3 trial in patients. The first readout should be in mid-2024. And if they have good solid data, they will open it up to carriers like me in likely 2025. And so I've got my eye, I'm watching companies like that have possible new things coming down the pipeline. There's also a company called Cognito Therapeutics that I'm watching. That one's out in San Francisco. This is a very different, it's a headset it's almost like a virtual reality headset that does a certain tone, hearing stimulation and visual light sensory. So it's apparently breaking down these buildups in your brain. So I've got my eye on things like that I would be happy to try. They don't have any toxic or negative side effects thus far. So when companies like that open up their trials to carriers, I will absolutely join on.
Yeah, we've actually covered both of those companies. For our viewers out there, if you want to just search on our site, you can learn more about those therapeutics. But if you so I want to talk a little bit about the science behind this, because you're obviously educated, you have a PhD, more than the average person. What is it? I mean, I've always been, ApoE has always been described to me as like cholesterol transport, right? It has a big role in cholesterol transport. That's why people like something about the E4 variant that makes the process easier to go wrong. But tell us a little bit. I mean, that was my very crude, unscientific explanation. Tell us what you know about, obviously statins. If you're taking statins, that's going to lower your cholesterol risk. So tell us a little bit about what you know about E4 and its interaction with cholesterol, and why people with that genetic variant have a predisposition towards things going wrong versus someone without that gene.
I'm not sure I'm going to be helpful and know any more than you do. My understanding is what your understanding is. It's out of my scientific area of expertise completely. I was a formulation scientist, but it's a known biomarker, right? So it's a signal that for sure, and there's a clear tie between that and and Alzheimer's. So exactly, high cholesterol, and here's where no one exactly knows the biology of Alzheimer's, right? A lot of it is speculation, but things like the ApoE4 biomarker have been found over and over again to be a clear tie. So that's why anything that you can do that keeps your cholesterol down, which we know is, obviously a cardiovascular thing as well, then it can only be good for you, for your brain as well.
Wendy, we have another question going on. I guess my question to you is, have you ever, okay, so to find out if you have plaque in your brain, you usually, a lot of people get either a spinal tap or a PET scan, which are very expensive, not covered by insurance. Now, new technology is allowing blood tests to identify plaque, and then there's also ones that identify tangles that are coming to market through blood biomarkers. So someone is asking you, have you ever had the blood test? Do you know if you have plaque in your brain?
I have not, but I know companies like Alzheimer are trying to partner with companies like that. And there is a company that can measure that oligomerization level, and they are detecting, elevated oligomers 13 years before people have been symptomatic for Alzheimer's. So these, again, are all in development. They're companies that I'm watching. The Alzheimer's space should be watching them very carefully. And, I feel that some really good things are going to happen in the next 5 to 10 years here.
So we probably should explain to people what an oligomer is and why it's important. I mean, it's basically, an oligomer is when you were talking about a drug that's tackling the oligomers, that's actually before the plaque builds up, right? It's like an earlier stage. Is that correct to say?
Yeah, so you can just think of oligomers as little tiny building blocks, and they attach to each other and form long strings, and those strings tangle up and form the tau tangles, and they glob up into plaques, and those are the amyloid plaques that are found in the brain. So when I say there's a company that's preventing the oligomerization process they're inserting something in that's stopping those oligomers from being able to attach to each other. So they're just staying as single units and not able to glob up the brain with tangles and plaques.
Okay, and someone else is asking if you're saying that elevated cholesterol is in fact connected to dementia.
Depends on if you ask me or if you ask your doctors. They're not going to give you a yes yet. There's a lot of science that indicates that. There are a lot of researchers that are showing that, but it's not, doctors are not being taught that in the books yet.
Yeah. I mean, one of the issues that we find too is learning about brain health is often what often you need to do is understand how biological systems relate, right? How is vascular related to brain health? How is glucose processing related to brain health? And that probably is the easiest way to substantiate in your own mind, what are risk factors, right?
But again, everything in the human body is connected in some way or the other. And you can do all the right things and you can still get a disease like Alzheimer's because of, a bad genetic set of cards that was dealt to you. So, there are lots of relationships and indications that things are risk factors, but even if you don't have those risk factors, you can get Alzheimer's. And even if you have all of the risk factors, you don't necessarily get Alzheimer's. So there's also some genetic predisposition and luck that gets thrown into the mix.
I want to talk to you a little bit about, the just finding out that potentially you may have plaque in your brain. That to me is almost like one step further than finding out your genetic status, right? I mean, would you want to know that? You talked about the blood tests that are coming to market. Would you want to know?
Not necessarily, to be honest. I don't know if I want to do that PET scan yet, and I'm not as of now, because we all know the damage to your brain starts 15 years before or more before you're symptomatic. I don't want to know if my years are already being counted, I guess. No, I don't know if I want to know. Some people do, or if I had to find out, if I had to get that test to enter a clinical trial that I thought really showed promise, that's when I will do it.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess you would know maybe because if the trial requires you to have plaque in your brain, then and you're accepted, you would know
Exactly.
that you have. Yeah.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about how things have changed. I mean, are you doing things differently than you were before you knew that you had homozygous E4?
Somewhat, but probably really not more than what we all should be doing anyway, is that's living every day for, to its greatest potential. I saw my parents make the mistake of putting everything off until they were retired. I heard that excuse over and over again. Oh, would love to go there. We'll do it when we're retired. I'd love to do that. But, when we're retired. And then by the time my dad retired, he retired to take care of my mom. So it was too late. And they got to do very little of that before it was even impossible for her to go to the bathroom in a public restroom anymore. So I'm not going to make that mistake. And I'm just trying to do whatever I want to do now as time permits. I'm also trying to more actively watch the Alzheimer's space and see what I can do for myself and my family. But again, we all should be living as healthy lives as possible. So I would say it's slightly different, but not that much.
What would you say to people today who are considering, they know they have a family link because they have a mother, father, grandmother, aunt, uncle. What would you say to those people who are actually considering genetic testing? Would you recommend they do it or not?
Depends on their personality. I think some people, if you have the mindset that it will empower you to look for potential clinical trials or help for yourself, then by all means go do it. If it's going to sit on your shoulders and weigh you down the rest of your years, maybe hold off until there's something, more drugs available on the market. And we just did recently have lecanemab go to FDA approved. Aduhelm was not so long ago, but those drugs have some serious potential side effects. So, and they're not candidates for everybody, nor would I not feel comfortable doing a clinical trial with those right now. So I think it's people have to wait till they're at the right mindset and they feel like there's enough hope out there for them to have this burden on them and try to do something about it.
Another question, I mean, you have children. Another question we get is, when you find out your genetic status, what does that mean for your kids?
We did it as a family and all three of my kids carry one. So they will have slightly increased risk of getting it. That was to be expected really as soon as I saw that I had two. Right. So, and that's how I knew before my dad went down this path. I was seeing some early, dementia signs, but with my genetic test results in hand, I knew what was happening to him before the doctors realized it.
Yeah. Wendy, thank you so much. It's really, I think, great for people like yourself to talk to others who are kind of in this, should I, shouldn't I, or I found out, what does it all mean? And, you're living proof that be proactive, live life every day. Like we all should be, healthily and to the best of our potential. So thank you for sharing your story. It really means a lot. I can't tell you how many questions we get about this on Being Patient. So I know it's very helpful to people.
My pleasure, Deborah. And thank you very much for having me.
So if you missed any of this interview, you want to know more, please go to our website, beingpatient.com. Don't forget to sign up for our newsletter. Our newsletter will alert you to talks in the future, talks like the one we just had with Wendy. If you have any ideas or you want to hear from someone, don't forget to email us at info@beingpatient.com. Thanks everyone for watching. Have a great day and we'll see you soon. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's podcast. For more information on upcoming interviews, don't forget to sign up for our newsletter at beingpatient.com. That's beingpatient.com. And send us any feedback you may have, whether it's someone you want us to interview or any comment about our podcast series. You can do so by emailing info@beingpatient.com. Thanks for listening, everyone. I'm Deborah Kahn.